My name is Ann Coy. I am the Healing City Baltimore coordinator. Healing City Baltimore is really a coming together of all of these individuals and organizations and community members to work around having a racially, socially, economically just and thriving Baltimore for all. We wanted there to be a movement of neighbors and community who could engage in conversations and embrace differences and commit to healing together. And that in order to do that, we needed to be pursuing a racially, socially, and economically just Baltimore. And that if we weren't having conversations about the impact of racist policies in Baltimore and the role that race plays in Baltimore, there couldn't be healing that happened. That so much of what Baltimore is confronting is really centered around historic racism that continues to exist today, and the impacts really are what continue to be felt today. I moved to Baltimore in 2006 as a Teach for America Corps member. I taught 2nd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade over my time in the classroom. And I love teaching. I love my kids. I love being in the classroom. I love being in community. But I remember one year having 36 4th graders in one class and feeling overwhelmed with knowing that I didn't know how to support all my kids. I didn't know how to support kids in my classroom, but I knew that they were experiencing things in their lives that were having a huge impact on the way that they were able to interact in school and able to make progress. And so I went on to work with Johns Hopkins, where I had gotten a master's degree and wanted to support teachers and wanted to help teachers know that they were doing a really great job and help connect them to resources that they needed to be able to stay in the classroom. Councilmember Cohen had put out a call into our kind of community of educators. He also had done Teach for America, and he and I kind of knew one another on the peripheral of kind of the network of teachers, but he had put out this call that he needed an education fellow to do some work with him around trauma in Baltimore. And at the time, he was chairing the Education and Youth Committee, and there had been 2 shootings that had taken place, one outside of 2 schools in his district, and one had taken place inside Frederick Douglass High School. And he had held a hearing as the chair of the Education and Youth Committee to talk about youth violence, youth voices. And at the time, the conversation was really focused on how we could have our schools be safer spaces. And he anticipated that the conversation would really be around how and if we should be arming our school resource officers. And there were 3 students from Frederick Douglass High School who had come to testify at this hearing. And they talked about their experiences the day of the shooting and how this school that had been their one safe space had been compromised. And how in so many other spaces in their lives, they had experienced trauma, but in school, they had felt safe. And they needed for the adults to not think about how to bring more guns into this space, but to think about how they could better support youth across Baltimore who are experiencing parents who have been incarcerated, who have lost friends to overdoses, who have open air drug and gun markets in their neighborhoods, who often have experienced loss and grief within their families. And they really listed what we now know as adverse childhood experiences. And after that hearing, Councilmember Cohen approached these young people and said, I really want to work with you all on thinking through how we can address this trauma and these experiences that young people are having in Baltimore. And so at that point, Councilmember Cohen brought me on to his team to help really think about how we could draft legislation that would impact the way that our city government is addressing trauma. So as a council member, that is his primary role, is in legislating. And so he wanted to hear from people from all across Baltimore about their experiences. And so for the next year or so, we conducted over 200 listening sessions in barbershops and in beauty salons and in rec centers and in classrooms and one-on-one with people to hear about the experiences that people had had. And in conducting all those listening sessions, it was very clear that the experiences that people had needed to have support. And it was clear that not only did we need legislation that would reduce trauma and think about how to shift the way that our government systems worked, but we also wanted to bring together all of these people that we had heard about their experiences. And in listening to all of those experiences, we also heard from so many of the healers in Baltimore City. There are so many people that are doing incredible healing work in their neighborhoods and in their churches and from their homes and in their community. And we wanted to really think about how we could better support those people who are doing this needed work and eliminate some of the silos that tend to exist in Baltimore, and think about how we could make better connections for people. Think about how we could leverage work that was happening in different parts of the city in order to have a greater impact. We want for there to be trust. We want for people to feel like there's a sense of belonging and space for them, and that they play a role within the community in ways that they want. We want for there to be a greater awareness of trauma-informed care and perspective, and have people really recognize that the way that our systems operate, when we say we want for a system to be trauma-informed, it doesn't mean that we want everyone to be a social worker. It means that we want for people to welcome people into their spaces, recognizing that they have had past experiences, and that those past experiences shape the way that that person is coming into your presence. And so when we have a student or a young person coming into a library or a rec center that maybe is exhibiting behaviors that we don't want to see in those spaces, rather than putting them out, approaching that person with coming from a place of understanding. The number of people in Baltimore City that have been touched in some way by the Healing City movement is in the tens of thousands. And having people feel like they belong and that there's a place and that their voice is desired and wanted is so important. And I think Healing City has been able to do that for so many people. And I think one of the things that's so unique about the movement is that essentially really what we want to do is lift up others. Like, we are not mental health practitioners. When people come to us and say, hey, I want training, it's not us that's going to provide any training. It's making a connection out to someone who's already doing that in community. And I truly feel like I have the best job in Baltimore, that I get to work with so many of the healers and celebrate the work that they're doing and think about how we can make more connections and have them have more impact. The second thing I would say has been a really great accomplishment is that Healing City has had the opportunity to support the implementation of the legislation, the Elijah Cummings Healing City Act. And one of the things that's been called for in that legislation was that our city agencies should have training around trauma-informed care. And our first agency that we have been implementing training with has been the Enoch Pratt Free Libraries. And Director Heidi Daniel there has been an incredible champion of the work that we've been doing as Healing City. And she really sees libraries as community centers and spaces. And she really wanted training for her staff around trauma-informed care. And the libraries have gone through a 6-part training where they have heard from Dr. Lawrence Brown about the Black butterfly and how segregation happened in Baltimore City and how those impacts continue to play out today. We have heard from Shauna Marie Brown about the epigenetics of like what it means for people who have generationally experienced trauma. We've heard from Sage Wellness in just Trauma 101 and what happens to the brain when someone experiences trauma and how it changes the way that people feel and how they react and how they're physiologically different when they experience trauma. We've also heard from Roberta's house to learn more about how grief impacts people. In Baltimore, we lose more than 1,000 people a year to overdose, and we have an incredibly high rate of gun violence. And there are so many people in Baltimore who are experiencing deep and complicated grief, and understanding how that grief and trauma play out and connecting that training to what if that's been your experience for generations? Like, how does that change a person? We've also heard from young people who are part of the Healing Youth Alliance to hear about the youth perspective in how young people experience trauma and healing in Baltimore. Through this training and through these conversations, there are policy changes that our systems will make that will really impact the way that they interact with patrons and people in community in Baltimore. Baltimore needs a boost in this moment to show all the incredible work that's happening. I think there is a shadow that sometimes covers the incredible wealth that we have as a city in resources of people who are best in class in the work that they do. And there are community organizers and artists. I mean, the number of artists here in Baltimore that are truly healers in their community is incredible. And I think the more that we can shine a light on all of the incredible things, approaching our city from a strengths-based perspective, recognizing that there's so many hidden gems and like blazing diamonds that exist here, the more we're able to do that, looking through a lens of equity, recognizing where people potentially have not been lifted up or recognized, or places where cultural differences have not made certain neighborhoods or individuals as high profile, and really thinking about how do we rebalance the way that we are uplifting people, uplifting work that's happening, and really honoring all of the good that we have here in a city. All of the incredible youth leaders, all of the incredible men and women who are out in neighborhood and community, walking streets, attending school meetings, like truly as healers. I mean, I think that boost to all of the good can help to remove some of that shadow that I think can sometimes cover Baltimore when all that's talked about is violence. And if we can focus more on the strengths that people have, I think there is so much healing that can happen across our city and in our neighborhoods and in our homes and for people individually.